I have watched this happen more times than most people realize. A new technology appears. The early demonstrations are astonishing. The public sees magic. The capital markets see destiny. The companies involved stop speaking like businessmen and start speaking like prophets. And somewhere in the middle of that fever, ordinary people begin to ask the wrong question. They ask whether the technology is real. The right question is whether the financial structure being built around the technology makes sense. Those are not the same thing. A technology can be remarkable and still sit inside a financial model. That is absurd. That distinction has ruined a great many people. If I were a young person trying to understand the world being built around artificial intelligence, I would start there. I would begin with the simple idea that a thing can be useful, even revolutionary, and still be surrounded by terrible economics. People have a habit of confusing inevitability of use with inevitability of profit. They confuse adoption with returns. They confuse excitement with cash flow. They confuse scale with sense. That is how bubbles get dressed up as civilization. What we are living through now has many of the same characteristics. I do not say that because I think artificial intelligence is fake. I say it because the technology itself is plainly impressive. Anyone with eyes can see the rate of improvement. If you take a capability that improves a little every quarter, and you project that not in a straight line but in an accumulating line, eventually what once looked like a toy becomes viable, and what once looked viable becomes dominant. That part is real. That part matters. And a lot of people miss it because they think in straight lines. But there is another mistake that is just as costly. They see that exponential improvement and assume every dollar being thrown at the sector will earn a rational return. That part does not follow. A railroad can change a country and still bankrupt the men who overbuilt it. An electrical grid can transform modern life and still crush the people who finance too much of it at the wrong prices. A highway system can alter commerce and still produce a decade of pain if the capital structure behind it outruns the economics. History is littered with useful things that were terrible investments at the point of mass excitement. That is one of the oldest lessons in finance. The lesson is not that the future will not arrive. The lesson is that investors often lose their senses while building it. What makes the present moment especially dangerous is not merely the size of the spending. It is the kind of asset being built. When people built railways, they built something that could last for generations. When they built roads, they built something that served for decades. When they laid fiber, they laid an asset with a long, useful life. Now we are building vast computing infrastructure that can become outdated in a handful of years. That is a very different proposition. A country can survive a period of overinvestment more easily when the thing overbuilt remains useful for a long time. But when the equipment has a short replacement cycle, the treadmill is brutal. You are not simply financing a one-time foundation. You are financing a recurring appetite. You are feeding a machine that demands to be fed again before the first meal has been digested. That is why I take the economics seriously. It is not enough to say the computers are powerful. It is not enough to say the models are improving. It is not enough to say the future is coming. You have to ask who is paying, who is getting value, who is willing to keep paying, and whether the revenue model remotely matches the capital outlay. If the answer is no, then you may be looking at a very useful technology wrapped in a very dangerous financial shell. I have seen enough of markets to know that men can remain intoxicated for longer than common sense expects. They can keep building because nobody wants to be the one who stepped off the train too early. They can keep financing because the fear of missing out becomes stronger than the fear of overpaying. They can keep telling themselves that this time the math will work because the story is grand enough. Stories always get grandest when arithmetic gets weakest. That is a rule worth remembering. I have also learned that bubbles do not usually advertise themselves honestly. They present themselves as patriotism, modernization, productivity, national necessity, strategic urgency, or once-in-a-civilization opportunity. Sometimes they are all of those things, and sometimes they are still bubbles. One does not cancel the other. If someone told me that hundreds of billions were being spent to build infrastructure with a short, useful life, uncertain monetization, and a public user base that loves the product far more than it loves paying for it, I would not call that comforting. I would call it familiar. I would call it the kind of imbalance that deserves cold-blooded thought. Now, here is where most people make the second mistake. They see danger in the giant capital structure and assume that means there is no opportunity for the individual. That is not true either. Some of the greatest personal opportunities appear exactly when large institutions misprice the world. The crowd goes toward what is biggest, loudest, and most legible. The individual can do well by going toward what is specific, practical, validated, and human. When I hear people ask what skills survive in a world of artificial intelligence, I do not begin with coding languages or platform tricks. I begin with the entrepreneurial skill set. That phrase is often misunderstood. People hear entrepreneurship and imagine pitching on a stage, raising millions, hiring armies, and trying to conquer the globe. Most of that is theater. The underlying skill set is much more durable and much more valuable. It is the ability to notice an opportunity. It is the ability to test cheaply whether people actually care. It is the ability to turn a rough idea into a concrete offer. It is the ability to see whether the offer satisfies a real need. It is the ability to make an initial sale. It is the ability to improve, package, and extend what works. And if necessary, it is the ability to discard what does not work before it eats years of your life. That sequence is priceless. It is also human. A lot of people fail because they fall in love with ideas before they validate them. They get excited by possibility and skip the unpleasant discipline of finding out whether the market agrees. That is the rookie error in business. The market does not care about your private enthusiasm. It does not reward the beauty of your internal story. It responds to pain, desire, convenience, identity, speed, relief, hope, prestige, belonging, and tangible value. If an idea sits on top of one of those things, it may have a chance. If it does not, affection from the founder is useless. One of the smartest habits any entrepreneur can develop is cheap validation. Do not build the cathedral first. Test whether anyone wants to enter the church. You can learn a tremendous amount from a waiting list. A pre-sale, a pilot, a workshop, a consulting offer, a limited cohort, a rough prototype, or a narrow niche service. People think validation is glamorous because they imagine it as certainty. In reality, it is humbling. It tells you whether the thing you prefer is actually the thing people want, and many times the answer is no. That answer is painful. It is also valuable. An idea you like a little may sit on top of a much larger human need than the idea you adore. The disciplined entrepreneur listens. The vain entrepreneur insists. The disciplined one tends to survive. I would tell any young person that there are 6 broad steps that matter more than slogans. First comes founder opportunity fit. That simply means choosing an area where your curiosity, experience, temperament, and energy actually belong. I have never believed in building a life around somebody else's envy. If you are going to spend years on something, it helps if you are fit for the terrain. Second comes validation. Can you sell it? Can you build it? Not in theory. In reality, third comes product market fit. When people buy it, do they feel satisfied enough to stay, return, refer, or deepen the relationship? That is a harsher test than getting attention. A lot of things get attention, far fewer deserve loyalty. Fourth comes go-to-market. That means learning how to bring the thing to customers in a repeatable way. Fifth comes scale. And sixth, if appropriate, comes exit or renewal. Most people try to skip from a vague idea to scale. That is how you burn capital, time, confidence, and trust. They want the movie trailer without living through the scenes that make the ending possible. The interesting feature of this AI era is that the cost of moving through those early stages has collapsed for many kinds of businesses. That changes the game. There used to be business categories that were effectively reserved for a small elite because the upfront burden was too high. Software was one of them. Building a useful software product used to require serious money, serious talent, and serious patience. That kept many people out. Now, many of those barriers have fallen. This does not mean software becomes more precious. In many cases, it means software becomes more common. That is a very important difference. The crowd keeps talking as if ease of creation automatically increases value. Very often, it does the opposite. When everyone can build a tool quickly, the tool by itself becomes less defensible. The standalone product slides toward commodity. That does not mean there is no business there. It means the moat has moved. The moat no longer sits comfortably in the code alone. The moat may sit in the playbook around the code. It may sit in the training, the community, the workflow, the implementation, the trust, the taste, the data, the brand, or the identity attached to using it. That is where people need to think more clearly. A simple tool that comes with a method, a culture, a network, and a real transformation can still be attractive. A simple tool with no emotional or practical ecosystem around it may be copied endlessly. That is why I would not advise most people to chase some grand abstract dream of building the next giant software empire from day one. I would advise them to look at a narrow niche. Take what you know, turn it into a playbook, find a group of people with a specific problem, use modern tools to build something around that problem quickly and cheaply. Then attach the elements that make the offer harder to replace. Education, training, implementation, community, cohorts, boot camps, templates, case studies, live sessions, a sense that the product is not merely software, but a way of doing something better. That is a much saner path than fantasizing about being the last massive platform, left standing after everyone else rushes into the same red ocean. People do not appreciate how fast blue oceans are shrinking. A category that once offered years of relative openness can become crowded with astonishing speed. An agency opportunity that looked fresh 10 years ago can become a bloodbath today. A content format that once felt unusual can become saturated in months. An AI tool that feels distinctive this quarter can be cloned before the quarter ends. That does not mean opportunities disappear. It means durability has to be earned differently. The pace of imitation rises, the advantage period shrinks. The entrepreneur has to become more adaptive, more specific, and more grounded in human reality. I find that many ambitious people make a third mistake here. They assume that unless the opportunity is gigantic, it is not worth pursuing. That bias has ruined many sensible lives. Very few people truly want a giant empire. They say they do because they are intoxicated by status language. But when you look honestly at what many people want, it is far simpler. They want autonomy. They want to work with people they like. They want variety, challenge, and flexibility. They want to see their children. They want a business that gives them an excellent life rather than a business that devours their life in exchange for admiration from strangers. That kind of business may not be enormous. It may still be wonderful. In fact, one of the peculiar truths of this era is that it may be easier than ever to build a good small business and harder than ever to build a stable giant one. A team of 10 people with the right niche, the right system, and the right audience can build something very attractive. Not glamorous by magazine standards, very attractive by life standards, that matters. I have spent enough time around wealthy people to know that the life standard is the one that counts. The bragging standard is a trap. But there is an even deeper question beneath all of this. If software can be built more easily, if content can be generated more cheaply, if information itself becomes abundant and almost free, what becomes scarce? That is the question that matters. Scarcity determines value more reliably than excitement does, and when I reason from first principles, I come back to the same answer. What becomes scarce is not information alone. It is credibility. It is lived experience. It is trust. It is taste. It is judgment. It is embodied presence. It is real community. It is emotional resonance. It is human specificity. Machines can summarize what happened. They are getting very good at that, but people still crave what it felt like. A machine can tell you that a city was noisy, a market broke, a trend accelerated, a founder failed, or a family celebrated. A human being can tell you what it was like to stand in that room, lose that money, make that bet, feel that embarrassment, hold that risk, hear that silence, or sense that shift before anyone else had the language for it. That distinction is not decorative, it is economic. That is why I would tell creators, advisors, operators, teachers, and founders to stop assuming they need to sound impressive. Impressive is often overrated. Relatable is underrated. That sounds simple, but it is a profound commercial truth. A great many people think they need a Nobel Prize level story to matter. They think they must cure cancer, ring the stock exchange bell, build a rocket, or become a billionaire before the world will listen. In most cases, that is nonsense. The world often responds more strongly to a story that is precise, human, and emotionally legible than to one that is merely grand. People want to hear from someone who has seen a corner of reality in a way they have not. They want a guide, not just a monument. Every person who has lived attentively possesses some form of personal intellectual property. I do not mean patents, I mean lived patterns. I mean the accumulated playbooks of a real life, the things you have done repeatedly, the mistakes you have survived, the conversations you have been close enough to witness, the rooms you have sat in, the clients you have served, the transformations you have watched, the narrow domain where you can say, not merely what happens, but what it feels like, how it unfolds, where people lie to themselves, where they get stuck, and what actually changes outcomes. That is valuable. And now, for the first time, the tools available to ordinary people make it far easier to package and distribute that value. This is why I am not nearly as pessimistic about the individual as I am about some giant financial structures around AI. The same force that commoditizes shallow output the shallow will get cheaper, the specific may get stronger. If you know something real, if you can articulate it clearly, and if you can build a useful container around it, you can create a serious business without pretending to be a giant institution. That is a powerful shift. Let me put it in plain terms. Suppose you know how to hire and develop people well in a certain kind of company. That knowledge used to sit inside your head and inside your organization. Now you can turn it into a framework, a service, a tool, a training series, a workshop, a community, and perhaps a piece of software tailored to that workflow. Suppose you understand a certain kind of sales motion, patient communication, onboarding system, financial transition, creative process, or niche compliance problem. The same logic applies. The opportunity is not just in broadcasting content into the void. The opportunity is in connecting your playbook to a real need and making it easier for the customer to get a result. That is where economic value lives. The market does not worship effort. It rewards solved problems. There is another reason I think human connection will remain central. People do not merely consume utility. They seek belonging. That has always been true. The appetite for connection did not disappear when the world became more digital. In many ways, it grew stronger. A society full of frictionless digital convenience can become emotionally starved. When that happens, experiences that feel embodied, communal, and real begin to matter even more. A conference is not just information. A gathering is not just logistics. A live conversation is not just content. The scarce part is the shared human experience. That is why I suspect many successful offers in the years ahead will not sit in one category only. They will cluster. A community may come with software. Software may come with training. Training may come with events. Events may come with implementation support. Implementation may come with content. Content may lead into membership. Membership may lead into services. The old walls between categories are getting softer. That does not simplify the world. It changes what must be integrated. The entrepreneur who understands this will stop asking, "What app should I build?" He will ask, "What problem am I unique? What proof do I have? What human need sits underneath it? And what combination of tools, teaching, trust, and community makes the solution hard to walk away from?" That is a much better question. People also need to be honest about competition. If a market can be copied instantly, you must expect it to be copied. If your edge can be explained in one sentence and reproduced by next week, this is not a reason for despair. It is a reason for honesty. The edge may be in your speed of learning. It may be in your willingness to keep iterating. It may be in your reputation. It may be in your relationships. It may be in your taste. It may be in your ability to gather people around an idea and make them feel seen. It may be in your body of work, your voice, your synthesis, your consistency, your standards, or your service. Those are not as easy to clone as people think. The internet trained people to chase infinite scale. AI may force many to rediscover the dignity of precise usefulness. I happen to think that is healthy. The obsession with looking large has caused a lot of foolishness. A small company with strong margins, a real audience, genuine trust, and a clear offer can be far more resilient than a fashionable giant whose economics depend on staying fashionable. If I were 25 today, I would not spend my energy trying to be the loudest person in the room. I would spend it trying to become unmistakably useful to a specific group. I would study where I have real insight. I would list the problems I understand from lived experience. I would identify which of those problems are painful enough that people would pay to solve them. I would test interest with speed and humility. I would build the smallest workable offer. I would listen harder than I talk. I would package what works. I would attach community where community matters. I would remember that people buy progress, not abstraction. Prestige theater is everywhere right now. People use grand language to hide thin economics. They use giant market narratives to excuse the absence of a real customer. They announce revolutions when what they have is a demo. They assume that because a thing can be done, people will pay enough for it to justify the capital behind it. That is not disciplined thinking. Disciplined thinking asks what the replacement cycle is, what the acquisition cost is, what the retention looks like, whether the buyer truly feels the pain, whether the offer increases revenue, reduces cost, saves time, lowers anxiety, raises status, deepens belonging, or creates some other durable form of value. Without that, all you have is sound and spectacle. We are entering an era in which sound and spectacle will be available in industrial quantities. That means sober judgment becomes more important, not less. I also think the individual has to stop underestimating the power of personal narrative when it is attached to truth. People often hide the most commercially valuable parts of their own life because those parts feel ordinary to them. They assume their experience is too small, too local, too niche, too embarrassing, too specific, or too unglamorous. Often that is exactly why it matters. The advisor who sat with families in financial transition, the recruiter who knows how candidates actually behave when they are scared, the manager who has seen why teams fail after a merger, the founder who knows what happened during the first ugly year, not just the polished success years, the specialist who has watched clients make the same mistake 100 times, the person who has lived through a strange corner of the world with enough attention to describe it clearly. That is not trivia. That is signal. And in a world flooded with generic output, signal gets more precious. The temptation, of course, is to go broad. The internet trained everyone to broaden. Artificial intelligence may tempt them to broaden even more because the cost of production falls. But lower production costs do not create automatic relevance. Sometimes they simply create more noise. What cuts through noise is not volume alone. It is resonance. Resonance comes from reality. It comes from knowing exactly who you are speaking to and what wound, ambition, confusion, or aspiration you are addressing. It comes from speaking plainly enough that the right person feels recognized. This is why relatable so often beats impressive. Impressive can create distance. Relatable can create trust, and trust properly earned can be monetized in honorable ways. That does not mean manipulating people with false intimacy. It means telling the truth with enough clarity that others can use it. That is commerce at its best. Now let me return to the larger AI picture, because the two levels are connected. At the top level, you may have a huge capital cycle driven by fear, competition, national strategy, and speculative ambition. It may end well for the technology and badly for some investors. It may end with repricing, consolidation, and disappointment. It may end with fewer winners than the current enthusiasm imagines. That would not be unusual. At the individual level, however, The same technological wave can lower the cost of experimentation and creation so dramatically that millions of people gain tools they never had before. That is the paradox. The giant system may contain fragility, the individual may gain leverage. The right response is neither blind optimism nor theatrical doom. It is practical adaptation. Do not assume the biggest opportunity is the best opportunity. Do not assume the noisiest category is the most durable one. Do not assume you need to become a global platform to build a beautiful life. And do not assume the machine can replace everything simply because it can replace some things. What it threatens most immediately are the shallow, repeatable, easily specified layers of work that were already drifting toward commodity. What it may elevate are the people who can combine tools with judgment, speed with taste, specificity with humanity, and product with relationship. That combination is hard. It is also promising. If I had to reduce the whole matter to one principle, I would say this. The future will be built by two very different forces. One force will pour enormous sums into infrastructure, capacity, models, chips, and systems in a race that may include terrible economics. The other force will consist of individuals and small teams using cheaper tools to solve narrow human problems with extraordinary specificity. The first force will produce headlines, the second may produce happier lives. I know which side I would rather understand deeply. Whenever the world becomes intoxicated with scale, I become more interested in. Whenever the crowd starts talking as if only the largest boats can survive, I look for the nimble crafts that can change course quickly. Whenever capital gets hypnotized by grand systems, I look for the honest operator solving something concrete for a customer who knows exactly why he is paying. That instinct has served me well. It may serve others well. Now the age ahead will probably reward people who can do three things at once. They will understand technology without worshiping it. They will use new tools without mistaking the tools for the moat. And they will build around permanent human needs rather than temporary digital fashion. Connection is not going away. Trust is not going away. Belonging is not going away. The desire to learn from someone who has really been there is not going away. The appetite for progress, relief, identity, and meaning is not going away. Those are the constants. All intelligent business building begins by respecting the constants. In the end, I do not think the winning question is, how do I beat the machines? That question is too dramatic. The better question is, what can I build, teach, pack, or explain that sits at the intersection of a real human need, my actual experience, and the new leverage these tools provide? That question is calmer. It is less theatrical. It is also much more likely to make you money. I would keep another sentence nearby if I were starting from scratch. Do not build for applause. Build for proof. Proof that people care. Proof that they pay. Proof that they stay. Proof that they get a result. Proof that your offer matters in a life that is busier, noisier, and more distracted than ever. A lot of ambition dies because it wants admiration before evidence. Evidence first. Admiration can come later or not at all. It hardly matters. What matters is whether the thing works. If it works, you can deepen it. If it deepens, you can widen it. If it widens, you can decide whether you want scale, lifestyle, or some careful combination of both. That is a much saner journey than trying to imitate the giant myths of the moment. The myths of the moment are expensive. They are unstable. They make people feel late before they have even begun. There is no need for that. You do not need to own the whole future. You need to find your place in it. And if you do that well, if you validate honestly, if you speak from something real, if you attach your work to human needs that do not vanish when fashions change, then you may discover something the crowd usually forgets. The best businesses are not always the biggest ones. The best opportunities are not always the loudest ones. And the strongest moat in an age obsessed with machines may still begin with something wonderfully old-fashioned. A human being who knows something true. A human being who can make it useful. A human being who can gather the right people around it. That is where I would place my bet.